Alrighty, we are going to continue this critical thinking with chapter 10. We're starting with rationality today. So, the ancient philosopher Aristotle observed the human beings as being rational beings. So what separates us from animals is our rationality. Animals can think, but they cannot rationalize. Being rational is being able to embark on an abstract concept or abstract conceptualization, right? Animals are sentient, that is, they are self-aware. But humans are not only self-aware, but we are also aware of being aware. We can think about what it means to be an autonomous self, to be self-determined and responsible for the decisions that we make. We can contemplate the nature of reality and our place within it. We can project ourselves into alternate realities and run what-if scenarios in our minds. We can ask, what is good and what is right? We can contemplate justice and injustice. We have a brain that is the control center of our body, which the animals do too. It's just the rationality is just something that they don't use. I don't know if they don't have it, they don't show it for the other animals. But we are considerably more than just a brain-controlled body. We are beings of the mind. Our essence is to investigate, to discover, to reason, to contemplate, to analyze, evaluate, conclude, and to know. We can only do these kinds of things if we develop the skills associated with critical thinking. Only when we develop the skills that allow us to think at the highest possible levels can we achieve our potential to be completely human, to be fully rational beings. Anything less than the highest possible level of rationality is a waste of the human intellect. You need to develop critical thinking skills to achieve your potential as a human being. So, to be able to do what college students are supposed to be able to do. In elementary, middle, high school, the goal, for the most part, is to learn information and develop basic skills, reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and so forth. But in college, you're expected to be able to do more than that. Just learning the material is just not enough. You must be able to do something with the information you're given, which is why they say that for every 1 hour of instruction, you're supposed to study for 3 hours. So you have that rationalization on your own to be able to develop those skill sets. You need to be able to use it and to apply it. To do that, you need to be able to evaluate, you have to analyze, and you have to synthesize this information that you're receiving. You have to draw inferences to make judgments. You have to reach sound conclusions. Perhaps an example would be helpful. There's a philosophical position or a paradigm known as materialism. Materialism says, in effect, that only physical things exist, and all there is the physical cosmos and the individual things in it. These things comprised of atoms and such, the building blocks of physical matter. Many scientists and philosophers embrace materialism, but does the materialistic paradigm emerge from sound critical thinking? I'm here to tell you that it doesn't, or suggest that it doesn't. Look at quantum physics, right? If only physical things exist, then no mind is separate from the brain. There's only the physical brain that controls the body. But can the brain as a physical organ be capable of the kinds of things the human being is capable of, such as intentionality and purposefulness? For instance, as a thinking being, I can have the intention of writing about critical thinking. Can a physical object, such as a computer, which I'm using to talk to you on, have such an intention? It certainly cannot. My computer has no intentions whatsoever. It's just an object or a tool that I use to accomplish my purposes. But the purpose, the intention, all that is mine. Does the brain as a physical organ, like the stomach or the liver, actually have intentionality? Can it have a self-intended purpose? It is hard to see how it can have some sort of purpose. Materialists claim that it can. Their argument goes something like this. Only material things exist. Humans are entirely physical and are capable of intention. Intentions are a part of the thought process that occurs in the brain. The physical brain, therefore, is capable of intention. It seems like a good argument, yeah? A good critical thinker will say, no, absolutely not. And why not? Because it begins with an unwarranted assumption that only physical things exist. They did a study not too long ago about picking up a cup, right? That was the whole thing about the experiment. And they ran all this stuff to the brain to find out exactly when the mind told the hand to pick up the bottle. So, in the experiment, when the person was reaching for it, nothing happened. Nothing happened until 0.07 or whatever, some microseconds after the bottle was actually picked up, did the brain actually trigger. So that means that the intention and the actual act did not happen. There was no brain activity until the bottle was actually picked up. After the fact, microseconds after the fact, then the neurons were firing in the brain. So that's a serious problem with that argument. Since there's no physical evidence that non-physical things exist, it's clear that only physical things exist. That's absolutely ridiculous. There's a serious problem with that. It's incoherent. Of course, there's no physical evidence that non-physical things exist. How could there be? How could there be physical evidence of something that is not physical? We only see in one part of a spectrum of light, but we know that X-rays exist. So it's not a physical object. We can measure it with energy, but it's not really a physical object. Some would argue that fact. But as an idea of being able to see things, if seeing is believing, okay, you cannot see an X-ray. You cannot physically see an X-ray. You cannot see the microwaves coming off of the cell phones. You cannot see the radiation coming off of the cell phones or any other electronic device. But we know that it's there because we can sort of measure it. We can also measure meditators on their states of mind, but we cannot physically experience the things that they do, right? Let me be a little bit more specific. Okay, they produce a state which triggers chemical reactions, and it has different states of the brain, and you can see that on the scans. But when they come back and they tell you what they experienced, that is not a part of 3D physical reality. That's something completely different. The concept of the materialist is nonsensical. But even though there is not, and there cannot be, physical evidence of non-physical things, such as the mind, there's plenty of rational evidence. We know that non-physical things exist because we experience them all the time. A mathematical concept are not physical things, but they exist. Concepts such as justice are not physical things, but they exist. To argue that justice or goodness or kindness are just words that describe the way people behave is to say that, in an ultimate sense, there's no such thing as justice or goodness or kindness. There's only human behaviors. Some behaviors we consider good and some to be not so good. But if there's no such thing as good, then calling something good or bad is nonsensical. There's just what there is, some of which we like and some of which we don't like. But does that make any sense to you? Is that a plausible conception of reality? If so, the person who robs a bank and kills a guard in the process has not done anything objectively wrong. He has simply done something that most of us do not approve of. Does that make sense? To me, it does not. You have to draw your own conclusions. If materialism is true and only physical things exist, much of how we think is completely nonsensical. Can that be the case? Now, instead, I believe that when basic critical thinking skills are applied, when considering the truthfulness of materialism, the concept is seen for what it is. It is unwarranted and incoherent. Thus, materialism ought to be rejected. The ability to assess arguments and evaluate positions is a fundamental feature of the critical thinking process. And that's the rationality of it. We'll move on to chapter 11 later. In the next one, put your emotions aside.